Today I have the honor and added pressure of being the last person to give you a PNB talk today, so just bear with me. What's your problem? Well, the inverse problem is one of the most fascinating problems that we deal with on a daily basis, yet most of us don't even think twice about it. The inverse problem is the issue of how can you determine the cause of something by looking only at the results? You can imagine stepping out onto your lawn in the morning and seeing that it is wet all over. But why is it wet? Did it rain? Did your sprinkler go off? Maybe your siblings had a water balloon fight on the lawn? All you know for certain is that your grass is wet, but there are many possible reasons why that could be so. Now consider perception itself. When you see an object, you don't really see it as it really is. Our brains transduce information from the real world into electrical signals or action potentials. And that's all that our brain has access to in order to create perception. See, when you have light hitting the retina, it forms a two-dimensional image that could have an infinite number of real-world sources. For example, if you see a large person very far away or a tiny person very close up, the image on your retina would be the same. But even so, our brains are really good at dealing with this ambiguity. But how is it done? One way that statisticians deal with the inverse problem is through Bayesian inference. Bayesian inference allows us to incorporate our prior experience and our present information in order to come to what is the most probable outcome. Named after Thomas Bayes, this is the actual formula, but the idea behind it is what is most important for us today. Let's go back to our lawn example. So you have three hypotheses about why the grass is wet. It rained, or was your sprinkler, or with your siblings. Now you know that in a year, it rains more often than your sprinkler goes off, and your sprinkler goes off more often than your siblings have water balloon fights. So your prior expectations for the cause should be highest for the rain, lowest for your siblings, and somewhere in between for the sprinkler. But we're not finished yet. Now we have to take into consideration our data. So what do you know? You know that your grass is evenly and uniformly wet throughout. Okay, so what's the probability that that would happen if your siblings had a water balloon fight? It's pretty low. You'd more expect it to be wet in like random splotches, right? Now for rain or your sprinkler, the probability that it would be evenly wet if either was the case is about the same, but still higher than if it was your siblings. Given all of that information, you're able to update your estimate for what is truly the cause, and it turns out that rain is still most likely. But you can imagine that if the data were different, for example, if you saw that the grass was wet in like random splotches, or if there were bits of balloon all over the lawn, then it could rapidly become more likely that your siblings had something to do with it. Now, even though, there's a growing evidence that our brains are doing something akin to Bayesian inference when it comes to perception, that we rely on our prior expectations and our present information in order to create what we perceive. Take a look at this image. Do you see a duck? Perhaps a rabbit? Maybe now you see both. But researchers have shown that this image is most likely to be seen as a rabbit first on Easter Sunday. And this biasing could be due to a high prior expectation for things that look like rabbits around Easter time. The Ames Room. This looks like a giant man and a tiny woman playing catch. And the man behind them appears to shapeshift, growing in size as he walks across the back. But what's really happening here? In reality, this room on the right side, it's much farther away from us than the left side. But from our perspective, they've built this room to look normal. They're taking advantage of our prior expectations that rooms that look normal are normal. And we're using the room's features relative to the humans in order to judge size. So even though we fall prey to illusions and our perception is not perfect, it just might be optimal. Through experience, our brains learn how to be right most often. And that's why most of us can go through our entire lives without even thinking much about the inverse problem. So now I hope you have a greater understanding for your senses and more respect for their limits. Give yourself a pat on the head. Your brain deserves it. Thank you.